The old Riverton Theatre had been abandoned 4 years, a forgotten relic of a time when it hosted lavish performances and packed audiences. Now, after decades of neglect, the theatre was set to reopen. The town of Riverton was buzzing with excitement, but not everyone was thrilled. Some whispered that the theatre was cursed, that something sinister lurked behind its velvet curtains. Sophia Bennett, a young actress eager to make her mark, was cast in the lead role of the reopening production, a play called The Haunting of Riverton. It was a horror play, a fitting choice for the grand reopening, given the theatre's eerie reputation. On the first day of rehearsals, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long, and the old wooden floorboards creaked underfoot, as though someone was following her. She brushed it off as nerves. After all, it was just an old building, or so she thought. During one of the late-night rehearsals, strange things began to happen. Props would disappear, only to reappear in places they hadn't been left. The lighting flickered at odd times, casting unnatural shadows across the stage. At first, the cast and crew laughed it off as the quirks of an old building. But then came the night when a chandelier fell, crashing inches from Sophia's feet. Shaken but unhurt, she looked up to see where it had fallen from. The chandelier had been secured tightly, and no one had been near it. As she stared, something caught her eye, a figure standing in the upper balcony, dressed in what appeared to be old-fashioned clothing. The figure vanished before she could say a word. Sophia felt a cold dread creeping into her bones. She wasn't alone. The next morning, Sophia confided in her co-star, Michael, about what she had seen. Michael was skeptical at first, but as the rehearsals continued, more strange incidents occurred. Costumes were found torn, mirrors shattered without explanation, and the piano in the orchestra pit played haunting melodies by itself late into the night. The rumors about the theatre's curse resurfaced. People said that decades ago, during a performance, a fire had broken out. Many had escaped, but a young actress named Lillian Ashford had been trapped inside. She was said to have perished in the flames, her spirit now bound to the theatre, seeking revenge on anyone who tried to take her place. Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that Lillian was still here, watching, waiting. One night, while practicing her lines alone on stage, Sophia felt a sudden chill. The temperature dropped, her breath visible in the cold air. She turned to leave, but found the door to the dressing room locked. Panic set in as the lights flickered and went out, leaving her in complete darkness. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw her Lillian Ashford. The ghostly figure floated just above the stage, her dress tattered and singed, her eyes hollow with rage. Sophia froze as Lillian pointed directly at her, her lips moving soundlessly. But the message was clear: leave. Sophia screamed, stumbling back as the lights flickered back on. The vision of Lillian was gone, but the warning remained. Sophia tried to convince herself it was just her imagination, stress from the pressure of the performance. But the theatre had other plans. During a dress rehearsal, Sophia's costume began to tear at the seams, though no one had touched it. The makeup artists found bloodstains on her dressing table, though there was no injury to explain them. Michael, who had been dismissive of the supernatural occurrences, finally admitted that he, too, had seen something. He had caught glimpses of Lillian in the mirror while getting ready, her ghostly figure standing just behind him, always watching. The cast grew uneasy, some even quit, unwilling to perform in a place so clearly haunted. But the show had to go on, and Sophia felt trapped. The closer opening night drew, the more she felt Lillian's presence looming over her. Determined to find answers, Sophia began researching Lillian's life. In the town's archives, she found an old journal that had belonged to the actress. The pages were filled with Lillian's hopes and dreams, her excitement for the future. But as Sophia read further, the tone changed. The final entries revealed something darker. Lillian hadn't died in the fire by accident. She had been locked in the dressing room, left to die by a jealous rival. The rival had wanted the lead role, and in a moment of spite, had sealed Lillian's fate. Sophia realized that Lillian wasn't seeking revenge on the theater itself, but on the actresses who took the stage in her place. Lillian's spirit wouldn't rest until justice was served. As opening night approached, Sophia's nightmares worsened. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Lillian's charred face staring at her, pleading for help. The pressure was overwhelming, and Sophia found herself questioning her sanity. She wasn't sure if she could perform, not with the constant presence of the ghost looming over her, but the theater was counting on her, and there was no backing out now. On the night of the performance, Sophia stood in front of the mirror, applying her makeup with shaking hands. As she finished, she saw Lillian's reflection standing behind her once more, her eyes filled with sorrow. "You can't have it," Lillian whispered, her voice cold and distant. "It was mine." Despite the terror gnawing at her, Sophia stepped onto the stage. The audience was packed, the lights blinding, but all she could think about was Lillian. As she delivered her lines, she could feel the weight of the ghost's presence pressing down on her. Then, in the middle of the second act, the lights flickered again. A cold breeze swept through the theater, causing the audience to stir uneasily. From the corner of her eye, Sophia saw Lillian's form gliding through the audience, her eyes locked on Sophia. Sophia's heart pounded as she tried to keep her composure, but it was no use. She stumbled over her lines, her voice cracking as the fear overtook her. The audience began to murmur, sensing that something was terribly wrong. As the play neared its climax, the theater seemed to come alive with Lillian's rage. The temperature dropped, and the chandeliers above shook violently. The curtains rustled, though there was no breeze. The ghost's presence was palpable, and Sophia could feel her anger building. In the final scene, as Sophia's character was supposed to die, she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her chest. Gasping for breath, she collapsed on the stage, clutching at her chest as the world around her blurred. She looked up to see Lillian standing over her, a twisted smile on her face. "It's mine," Lillian whispered again before disappearing into the shadows. Sophia was rushed to the hospital, where doctors found no physical cause for her collapse. She was shaken, terrified, but determined to finish the performance. The show had to go on, no matter the cost. But something had changed. The cast and crew were afraid. No one wanted to return to the theater, and rumors of Lillian's curse spread like wildfire. Still, the town insisted that the show continue. Too much money had been invested, and the reopening was too important to cancel. Sophia, though terrified, agreed to return. She couldn't explain why, but she felt drawn to the theater, as if Lillian was calling her back. Michael, who had been by Sophia's side through it all, suggested a plan. He believed that Lillian's spirit could be appeased if they performed a ritual to release her from the theater. They would gather in the dressing room where Lillian had died, light candles, and say a prayer for her soul. Sophia was hesitant, but with no other options, she agreed. The night before the final performance, they gathered in the darkened theater, surrounded by the whispers of the past. As they lit the candles and began the ritual, the air grew heavy. The lights flickered, and for a moment, it felt as though the theater itself was holding its breath. As the ritual reached its peak, Lillian appeared once more, her face contorted with pain and anger. But as the final words of the prayer were spoken, something changed. Lillian's form began to soften, her features relaxing, if a great burden had been lifted. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm free." With that, Lillian vanished, and the theater fell silent. The curse had been lifted. The next night, Sophia and the cast performed the final show without incident. The atmosphere in the theater had changed. It felt lighter, as if the dark presence that had haunted it for so long had finally been banished. The performance was a success, and the audience gave them a standing ovation. But as Sophia took her final bow, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching her from the shadows. Weeks later, Sophia received a letter from an anonymous source. The letter contained details about Lillian's death that hadn't been made public. It revealed the name of Lillian's rival, the one who had locked her in the dressing room all those years ago. The name sent chills down Sophia's spine. It was the grandmother of the theatre's current owner. Realizing that the curse may not have been fully lifted, Sophia began to investigate further. What she uncovered was a web of lies, betrayal, and unfinished business that stretched far beyond Lillian's tragic death. Sophia couldn't escape the theatre. No matter how hard she tried, something kept pulling her back. The reopening had been a success, but now a new darkness was settling in. The shadows in the theatre had grown longer, and strange occurrences had resumed. It wasn't Lillian this time. It was something older, something darker. The theatre was never just haunted by one ghost. It was a place where darkness thrived, feeding off the fear and pain of those who performed there. Sophia had become part of its story, and now it wanted more.